Welcome to another episode of Beautiful, Bad and Bizarre. Today we're going to explore the life of the comedy actor Sid James. In a back bedroom of Granny Solomon's home on Hancock Street in Hillbrow, Johannesburg, South Africa, Renee Cohen, who was married to Laurie Cohen, whose stage name was Lou James, gave birth to their second child, another son, on May the 8th, 1913. They must have known Tony was coming. There couldn't have been another reason, Sid was often to remark years later. The baby was named Sidney Joel Cohen. Lou suggested both first names. Sidney was derived after Sidney Adler, who had married Lou's sister Kate, and Joel was his father's middle name. However, both names had been changed to Solly before the baby was 1 week old. Baby Solly's parents were performers. Lou, his father, had Eastern European ancestry and had been born in London. The family had lived in Horsley Buildings, not far from Sydney Street in the borough of Stepney near Bow. Solly's mother, Renee Solomon, had Dutch ancestry and had also been born in London. Before the birth of their children, both of Sid's parents decided at some point that their future lay in show business, and they were soon earning a living as the comedy and dance duo Lou and Renee James. Sid later recalled, "As soon as my mother was able to get up and about, my parents were on tour again. I was in a skip in the wings while my mum and dad were on stage doing their vaudeville act. I was usually bawling, and mum used to nip off the stage in between scenes to finish feeding me." As he grew older, Sid's father often took him on stage to show him off to the audience, and on occasion, Sid would also take part in the performances, which certainly built his confidence. The travelling lifestyle of Sid's parents meant that he and his brother Maurice were often left behind with other family members, including his favourite uncle, Louis, who was his father's older brother. Although his father had a love of gambling, it was his uncle that first introduced Sid to gambling, a habit and an addiction that was to stay with Sid for the rest of his life. With the constant absence of his parents, Sid felt a sense of abandonment and resentment, and it grew over time. He also struggled with the restrictions of being at school. Sid wasn't the smartest of pupils, but it was a teacher that was to change the young Solly's life forever. He had arrived at another new school and had been given a desk next to his cousin. Before the first lesson, the teacher, armed with registration cards on which were printed the boys' real names, asked, "Which one of you is Sidney?" Both boys stood up. Solly, because it was his real name, and his cousin Joel, because everyone called him Sidney. It all got very confusing for the teacher, so it was announced from there on both would be called by their proper names, Sidney and Joel. When Sid got home and told his mother what had happened, his mother declared, "We'd better change your surname too," and from there on, Solly Cohen became Sidney James. Sid's school life was hopeless. He hated it and would often truant. He failed his school leaving certificate and was sent to trade school to learn to be an electrician. He eventually dropped out altogether. By 1929, Sid's parents had long divorced, and Renee had opened a hairdressing salon and insisted Sid find a job. For a very brief time, he was a diamond sorter, and in later years he became a collector of uncut diamonds. In 1930, worried about Sid's inability to settle, his mother gave him an ultimatum: join the family business and train as a hairdresser, or leave. Sid chose to join the family business and did indeed train as a hairdresser, qualifying and becoming a sought-after hairdresser. But he fell out with his mother when he told her that he wanted to marry his girlfriend at the time. This caused a breakdown in their mother and son relationship, which culminated in Sid quitting his job with the family business and moving a good distance away to work at another hairdressing salon. While he was successful and very much in demand as a hairdresser, Sid had grown to hate it. He'd been earning extra money giving dance lessons, which were very popular, but Sid was restless, and by 1934 he returned to Johannesburg, and on the 12th of August 1936 he married his first wife, Bergie Delmont, known as Toots, at Johannesburg Central Register Office. Toots was the daughter of a wealthy Johannesburg businessman. Sid's amazing smile, warmth and kindness made a lasting impression on many of the people he met. But his biggest shortcoming was that despite being married, he was obsessed with women. He would be a lifelong ladies' man who never went without female company. While not considered attractive by social standards, his confident smile and personality easily made up for anything he was lacking in looks. At the end of October 1936, Toots found out that Sid had been seeing another woman. Not only that, but it's alleged the other woman was pregnant by Sid. This was to happen twice in a very short space of time. And with the help of his new father-in-law, who bailed him out on both occasions by paying the women off, Sid's marriage survived. However, when Toots became pregnant and their daughter Elizabeth was born in December 1937, Sid showed little interest. Sid James was still restless and began to voice dreams of moving to London and becoming an actor. In an attempt to keep his daughter close by within the family fold, Toots's father purchased a hairdressing salon for Sid in the hope that he would forget about his dreams of acting. Although Sid James was so successful in the business that in a short space of time he had over 30 stylists and beauticians working for him, he was still restless, and after a year he declared his intention to pursue acting and joined the Johannesburg Repertory Players, and as a result he received his first fee-paying job at the age of 26 in 1938 when he was hired by the South African Broadcasting Corporation to be on radio, starring alongside a teenager called Moira Lister. It would be another 15 years before they would work together again. In 1939, Sid James began another affair with a young woman who was also married. Her name was Meg Sergio. This was the final straw for Toots, who filed for divorce. Sid had built himself a complicated love life, and now his father-in-law was much less forgiving. While war broke out in his personal life, World War II had also begun. So Sid James decided that serving as a professional soldier would be safer than staying around to face the music. He joined the army and was eventually to serve as a lieutenant in the entertainment unit at the army base. The young lady Sid had an affair with was also a dancer and part of the South African Army Entertainment Unit, and in 1943 Meg would also become his second wife. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before Sid was repeating old patterns of womanising, but in 1946, with war over, Sid and Meg decided to start a new life abroad. The couple travelled to England, arriving in Southampton Dock on Christmas Day 1946. Meg was 5 months pregnant. Their daughter, Rena Christina James, would be born in London on the 26th of April 1947. Sid James began looking for acting jobs, initially with no luck, until quite by chance while walking through London, he and Meg met two friends who had been in the Army Entertainment Unit, Olga Lowe and her husband, actor John Torr. The couple were just on their way to an audition for the parts of a gangster and his mole. Torr didn't feel he quite fit the part of the gangster, but he thought Sid James did, and so he suggested Sid and Olga audition together. Olga didn't get the part, but Sid James did. He was cast as Eddie Clinton in the 1947 film Black Memory. He also got an agent the same day, Phyllis Parnell. Sid James had been in the country for just 9 days, and from there on he worked continuously with barely a break. The only thing that could come close to Sid's persistent womanising was his prolific career, with well in excess of 140 credits in film and on television and radio. When Sid wasn't on the screen, he was on the stage. He rarely turned down a job. Sid was coming to the end of his marriage to Meg after meeting the 19-year-old actress Valerie Ashton, who was 15 years Sid's junior. By 1950, Sid had moved out of the family home and was now living with Valerie. After the divorce, Sid would marry Valerie in 1952, and the couple would go on to have a son, Stephen, born in 1954, and in 1957 their daughter Susan was born. As the 1950s dawned, Sid had accumulated a portfolio of over 12 films, all made within just 3 years, as well as a growing list of stage performances. Sid was soon to feature in his first major comedy role for Ealing Studios in the 1951 comedy classic The Lavender Hill Mob. It was also in 1951 that Sid James appeared alongside Diana Dawes in the film Lady Godiva Rides Again, aka Bikini Baby, and in 1953 they worked together again in Is Your Honeymoon Really Necessary? Another film both Diana and Sid feature in is one of my favourites, 1954's The Weak and the Wicked. Sid James also appears in the 1955 film with Diana, A Kid for Two Farthings. I couldn't possibly list all of Sid's films, but a few of my favourites that haven't already been mentioned are 1953's Bad Blonde with Barbara Payton, 1957's Hell Drivers, and 1959's The Sheriff of Fractured Jaw, with none other than the bombshell herself, Jane Mansfield. Kenneth More also appeared in The Sheriff of Fractured Jaw. Another 1959 film that Sid James appeared in that was incredibly brilliant, Too Many Crooks, alongside the fabulous Brenda de Banzi, John Le Mesurier, and Terry Thomas, to name just a few of the stellar cast. It was during the 1950s that Sid began working with Tony Hancock. In 1954 they started collaborating on the BBC radio programme Hancock's Half Hour. The writers Ray Galton and Alan Simpson had the idea to cast Sid after seeing him in The Lavender Hill Mob. The other regular cast members of the radio show, with the exception of Sid James, were dropped when the show shifted to television. Sid's role in the programme had now significantly increased, and many people saw Tony Hancock and Sid James as a duo. As I've previously discussed in a video on this channel about Tony Hancock, you can find a link in the description, Tony was uncomfortable with the way things were going and felt that his working relationship with Sid had run its course. When the 6th television season had concluded in 1960, Tony Hancock made the decision to sever his professional ties with Sid James. While they were to remain friends, Sid was very upset, and where they had previously socialised outside of work, things were never the same again. There were days when Sid would film all day and be on stage at night. He was a total workaholic, and he was about to make his debut in a film series that would just carry on. Sid James first joined the Carry On team in the film Carry On Constable, when Ted Ray, who had participated in Carry On Teacher in 1959 as a key player, was having contractual issues and was let go of after one movie. Sid took Ted's place, and the rest is a 19-film history. Sid James was to become one of the regular cast's most prominent actors. Another Carry On cast member, Barbara Windsor, had first seen Sid James on stage in 1953 when Sid was in the musical Guys and Dolls. At the time, Barbara thought he was wonderful, and she said she found his craggy face very appealing. On May the 13th, 1967, Sid had a major heart attack as a result of his excessive workload. After his heart attack, Sid James, who was a heavy smoker, attempted to cut back by switching to smoking a pipe and the occasional cigar. He changed his diet, lost weight, and cut back on drinking alcohol to 2 or 3 glasses a night. But he just couldn't stop working or it seems, chasing women. That same year, after his heart attack, Sid was to appear in Carry On Doctor with the proviso that he could play his scenes in bed. Barbara Windsor had previously appeared in Carry On Spying in 1964, but she had not worked with Sid before. However, she was also to appear as a nurse in Carry On Doctor and had a scene with Sid in the film. As she wiggled and giggled up to his bed in her exaggeratedly sexy nurse's uniform, she supposedly caused his temperature to rise and the medical equipment to explode. With a 24-year age gap, 54-year-old Sid James had fallen for 30-year-old Barbara Windsor and set out to win her over with his charm, which is exactly what he achieved, despite being married to Valerie and Barbara being married to Ronnie Knight. The couple had a highly publicised romance that lasted for 10 years, only ending shortly before Sid's death, although Sid continued to attempt to win Barbara back. In 1971, Sid was working on the ITV sitcom Bless This House with his co-star Diana Copeland. The series ran until 1976. There were a total of 65 episodes in all. Monday, the 26th of April 1976, was Sid's daughter Rena's birthday. It was also the night Sid James was in his dressing room at the Empire Theatre, Sunderland, when a fan knocked on the dressing room door. Sid was applying his makeup for his role in the mating season. He waved the man in and signed a photograph and dated it. Handing it back to his visitor, Sid told him, "There you are, mate. Be my guest. I hope you enjoy the show." Before going on stage, Sid took a drink from his whiskey glass as he was waiting in the wings. Fellow actors had noticed he'd lost his sparkle and looked exhausted. He made his entrance on stage to a round of applause. The opening night performance was going well. His friend, the actress Olga Lowe, delivered lines to Sid, and Sid delivered back. Olga gave her next line to Sid, but there was no reply. Sid had collapsed on the sofa on stage and was holding his chest. At first, Olga thought it was a stunt and ad-libbed. The audience laughed. Gradually, she realised this was an emergency. Sid wasn't joking. The laughter in the audience continued as Olga shouted at the stage crew to bring the curtain down. The manager came onto the stage and realised Sid wasn't breathing. He pushed his way through the curtain and delivered the classic comedy line, "Is there a doctor in the house?" The audience roared with laughter. "No, no," he pleads. "This is serious. Mr. James has collapsed." A man in the front row who was a doctor stood up and the manager waved him over to the stage. The doctor realised that Sid James had had a heart attack and started attempts to revive him while waiting for the ambulance. When the ambulance arrived, the doctor continued trying to resuscitate Sid on the journey to the Sunderland Royal Infirmary, but by the time they arrived, Sid James was already dead. It was too late. Sid was 62 years old. Several years later, the comedian Les Dawson was to perform at the Sunderland Empire Theatre. And after the show, he said, "Nothing would tempt me to return to that theatre, and certainly not that dressing room. What I experienced in that dressing room will stay with me for the rest of my life," Les told a close friend. It was the same dressing room that had been occupied by Sid James on the night of the 26th of April 1976. Sid's funeral took place at Golders Green Crematorium on Thursday the 29th of April 1976. Many of the Carry On team didn't attend, but Jack Douglas and Bernard Breslaw were there.